Here's where all the panel wires come together.
Yeah.
So in this case, it's two sets of wires because I have two strings here. So what's coming in here is two sets of wires, 2 pluses, 2 minuses, 4 wires. In our eventual system, there will be 5 sets of plus and minus. There'll be 10 wires. So we'll actually bring them in 2 at a time in these knockouts in the bottom, a plus and minus for each string of panels. So this is a combiner box. This is where the combining happens. The way the combining happens is all the minuses that come in go to this PV negative bus bar.
Yep.
So that big metal bar is a bus bar. Mm-hmm. So when those 2 negatives or 5 negatives in the future come to this bus bar, you can then essentially treat them as 1. You can leave the bus bar with 1. So that's why there's actually 3 connections here. 2 of them are coming in from these panels, and 1 goes out, and it actually goes out through the back of this box, because on the other side of this box, inside this trailer, is the charge controller, which is our next stop.
Yeah.
So you could have these things next to each other in one room or whatever, but the way this is set up, the charge controller is right behind us here. So the negatives go to the bus bar, 2 of them go in, 1 comes out. I'm combined. Same thing with the positives. The positives actually go to these breakers, to the bottom of these breakers. The breakers connect to a bus, or there's a name for that thing, but maybe that might be positive bus bar as well. But that metal thing at the top is a bus bar. So now positives come in, right now 2, eventually I'll have 5 coming in, 5, and what comes out from this lug up in the corner, what comes out is 1 positive. I'm now combined. I've combined all the negatives into 1, I've combined all the positives into 1. That 1 positive and negative go out of the combiner box. In this case, they go out the back because the charge controller is right behind us. And you also send a ground. Mm-hmm. So the ground comes from the ground bus bar. So what goes on to the next step I just took, in this case, 2 negatives, 2 positives, and a ground. In the future, it will be 5 negatives, 5 positives, and a ground. But the idea is I'm turning into 1 positive, 1 negative, 1 ground.
Yeah.
That's the combining. So now to the charge controller goes 1 set of wires.
Okay.
So that's our combiner box.
Cool.
So we now have turned all of our panels into one big panel. Here we are inside. Here's the charge controller. This is right behind the combiner box we were just looking at. So things get a little tight, it'll be a little hard to see, but the hole that's on the back of this box,
yeah,
2 black wires come in, one of them's a positive, one of them's a negative, and a green wire comes in, a ground. Mm-hmm. Those are what we just created in the combiner box to come to here. So a positive comes in, a negative comes in, a ground comes in. The ground goes to a grounding lug, and then it leaves and goes on to the next device. But the positives and negatives, the positive and negative come to these 2 terminals, 2 of these terminals, and actually the terminals are kind of described. Here's the cover. The terminals are described right here. Whoops, I got them upside down. So this corresponds to this layout right here, right?
Yeah.
So what you see here is PV positive, PV minus. So PV is, you can read as panels, photovoltaic, right?
Okay.
So the 2 wires, the positive and negative that we just created in the combiner box and sent into here, they go right here. Plus here, minus here. So that's coming in. Then you go out. The next step after the charge controller is the battery. So you go out with a plus and a minus. So you take black wires again, plus minus, they come out of the bottom of the charge controller, and they go on to the next device. In theory, in concept, the next device is the batteries, but this is where the E-panel comes into play. This is the E-panel, or power distribution panel, just this box here, just this one in the middle.
Okay.
Okay? It is, like I said, it's a landing point, and it's a protection point. It's for breakers, but it has a bunch of bus bars in it, right? So where you can do things like we just did in the combiner box, where you can land multiple wires and sort of, they can come in as 1, 2, 3 wires and go out as maybe just 1 wire. So it's just a convenient landing point for things to make their way to the next device. So conceptually, the batteries follow the charge controller, but the wires actually physically go through this E-panel on their way to the batteries. So, but what leaves that charge controller is a plus and a minus for the battery. So that's to take the energy that we now have and feed it to the battery. And like I said, the charge controller's function is to take that wattage, whatever I was getting, which here we got some good example. We actually have sun. So this is, let me get some of these menus. Input. So remember how I said the system was, well now this is on the, so remember I said it was in this case, I only have six operating panels. Forget the solar mount we just looked at. On the trailer that we're sitting in right now, I have 6 panels.
Yeah.
I have it configured 2 sets of 3, 2 strings of 3.
Yeah.
The string is the same. The math is the same. A string of 3 is roughly 90 volts, 10 amps for 900 watts.
Okay.
I have 2 strings like that, so I have a total of 1,800 watts. When I connect those 2 strings, so one string, 90 volts, 10 amps, 900 watts.
Yeah.
2 strings, because they're in parallel, the amperage goes up. So it goes from 10 to 20. So the whole system of 6 panels, in the configuration that it's in, is 90 volts, 20 amps. 90 times 20, 1,800.
Yeah.
That's 6 panels at 300. So those are our rough numbers right now, right? So if we look at this, the input to this charge controller, notice what it says, 90.5. So it is running, because I don't know what time it is right now, but the sun's out real clear, right? Pretty decent angle. We're getting almost, what's available, right? In voltage. It's a 90, it'll bump up just below, and like I said, I rounded those numbers pretty crudely. What's coming in is 90 volts at 10 amps. This is not the full. Oh, it keeps changing. It changed from input to output. But 90 volts at 10 amps. And on this screen, at any moment, it only updates every few seconds or whatever, so the numbers aren't dead on exact, but very closely, you can multiply the voltage times the amperage and get the wattage. So right now, we are bringing in about 900 watts. Mm-hmm. It's bouncing around a little bit, right? But that's what's coming in. And the way it's coming in, the distribution between volts and amps is, like it says here, roughly 90 volts, 10 amps to give me 900 watts. If we came back in a couple hours at solar noon, which solar noon is halfway between sunrise and sunset, for us it's more like 12:20, 12:30 or something during the day. And if the sun were perfectly clear with no clouds, and if it weren't quite as hot as it was, but when the temperature rises outside, the panels actually get a little less efficient. They lose efficiency. Yeah. So if you did this in March or April or something, and the temperature outside was 70, 80 degrees, and the sun was perfect, at solar noon, it was right overhead, no clouds, and our panel tilt was the exact number to get the exact perfect angle of the sun. In theory, just like I did on paper, I can get 1,800 watts at any given moment. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't happen all the time. Obviously, it's not happening right now. I'm getting half of what these panels are capable of. Well, that's because it's, 10 a.m. or whatever it is, 9 a.m. So this will go up during the day. But it won't go up to 1,800 because it's hot. So they'll be a little inefficient because it's hot. But they will get up 1,500, 1,600. I'll get that much energy. And the way it'll do it is, because 90 volts, give or take a couple, is the maximum of the configuration I have, 90 volts. Yeah. What's going to happen is the amperage will rise. As the wattage, as the total wattage that's coming in goes up, the amperage will rise. But the voltage can't go up because the system is configured in such a way that it's 90 volts. Yeah. This won't go more than, other than the little rounding that I did, won't go more than 90 volts. This amperage will rise. If we came back in 2 hours, it might be getting 90 volts at 15 amps. And when you multiply those two together, what do you get? 1,400 or whatever it is. But so that equation, West Virginia, works all the time. When you read these numbers, it works. Okay, that's input. That's what's coming from the panels into this guy. He is going to send it out to these batteries. And because I'm not able to get too technical, and without getting too technical, the idea is he wants to provide it to these batteries in the way that they prefer it, right? In the way that they can accept it the best, right? So the output screen is next. Here's the output screen. Notice the numbers have changed. Notice the wattage, the total power, is about the same. It's taking all the total power that it's getting in from the panels, and it's feeding pretty much all of it to these batteries. 900 watts. It's bouncing around, but look how it's doing it. It's not doing it 90 volts and 10 amps. It's doing it at 48 volts. And that's because this is roughly a 48 volt system. So the batteries are in a 48 volt configuration, so it wants to send it at 48 volts.
How does it know?
That's its job.
Okay.
Electronics, and you know the way it's built. Yeah, that's the way it's built.
It detects what.
Yes, it is built to do that.
Right.
And actually, there are settings. You actually configure this device with menus, and you tell it basically. Yeah. So basically, this thing has a menu, and one of the menu items is what is your battery configuration, and mine is set to 48 volts. Right. So there's a lot of settings that tell it, but that's what this device. That's what you pay for. That's its job. But you tell it how everything's configured through these menus. So this is the beauty. This is where the system changes, right? So my panels are set up in a configuration that's 90 volts, in this case 20 amps, in the ultimate case 50 amps, because 5 strings. But the charge controller will take all of that and say, okay, that's fine, you're giving me X wattage, but you only chose to break it up the way you did so that you could send it through the wires and so that you wouldn't exceed any of my capabilities. But once I receive whatever wattage you're sending me, I'm going to choose to divvy it up in volts and amps in a way that the batteries like. And that's generally around 48 volts. So this number also, this output number, is not only what it's sending, the voltage it's sending to the batteries, that is the charge level of the batteries, not in a percentage, but that's what we're at. These batteries are at 48.4 volts. Now, this can get a little weird, but it's true of car batteries and stuff as well. You may have heard this. A 12 volt battery that you use on a car or in an RV. When you test it, you don't want it to read 12 volts. 12 volts is actually a dead battery. That sounds really weird, right? And that's always kind of threw me a little bit, but just take my word for it. When you test a car battery or an RV battery, you really want it to read 13 and change or something, right? When it's full. Yeah. This kind of works the same way. Even though this is a 48 volt system, the batteries are configured at 48 volts. They really don't top out at 48 volts. They top out above that. In my case, they top out at 49.6. And again, that's another setting that's in here that we've chosen. They top out at 49.6. So that tells me that I'm at 48.4 right now. These won't be full until I get to 49.6. So that's going to keep ticking up until it gets to 49.6. So we are not full. That's what that tells me. We're not full, but we're on our way there. When they get to 49.6, it will enter float mode, and it will be that mode of just trying to keep it topped. It'll basically just feed a little bit. It's almost trickle charging the batteries. Or what it can be doing is during the day, once these batteries get full, or even now while they're getting full, if I use something inside the trailer and I'm plugged into this thing and I'm using it, it'll take some of that energy and it won't send it all to the batteries. It sends some of it straight to the trailer.
Oh, great.
So if I kick the air conditioning on right now, I'd still have the amount of energy at this charge controller that I have getting from the panels, but I wouldn't send it all to the batteries. I'd be sending enough to the trailer to make it work. And the batteries get what's left.
What do you mean you'll be sending it? Doesn't it? Or it's
the charge controller.
It's automatic.
That's what this thing does.
It does, right.
It will decide.
It decides,
yes.
Right, okay.
So if I were right now, I'm running things in the RV now. They're just very small. Yeah. So, but if I kicked on the air conditioner, let's say, I'd still be getting the same amount of power, the same amount of wattage. But what you would see is, here's what you'd see. You would still see these same numbers, but if you were to actually test with a voltmeter and things, if you were to actually test what the batteries were getting, so even though this says it's sending 48 volts at 19 amps to the batteries, if I were running some big device inside the RV, the batteries wouldn't actually be getting all of that 19 amps. Some of those amps would be going to the trailer to run whatever device I'm running, and the batteries would just get what's left over. Now, if you can you reach behind you? I don't want you to. Behind that thing, there's a little bag. It's like an electrical device thing. Yeah, give me that. This is a meter. So I just learned this recently. This is not super high-tech stuff, but it's stuff that if you don't really think about it or you don't know any better, you wouldn't know. So I just bought this recently. This is a clamp style voltmeter. So I can clamp it around wires to get a reading. So what I'm going to do...
How much was it?
Maybe $30. It wasn't that bad. Wasn't that bad. They make nicer ones. They can be very expensive. They definitely can get a lot more expensive. This one wasn't too bad. But, you know, I'm sure it doesn't have all the capabilities of a lot of others. But I just want some very basic things out of this. So, they make one of these that I actually also have that... Oh, what am I doing? I don't need to do this. I don't need to do this. So these guys, so there are two styles of these meters. There's a clamp version that you can do this and clamp it around a wire.
Yeah.
And there's a version that has these probes, right? And these probes you can kind of touch here. Like for example, if I was checking a car battery, I could touch here, and get a reading, right? I don't need the probes for what I want to do right now. What I want to do right now is to show you. Now, I'm using a little bit of energy in the trailer, but I'm not running the air conditioner or anything like that. I'm not running the fridge. I just, you know, the computer or whatever. I'm just running some little things. So what we ought to see is, right now, in theory, I'm sending 19 point some amps to the batteries. I can check with this meter on these wires that the batteries are connected to. I can check how many amps are running through the wires.
Cool.
So what I'm going to find is, that 19-ish is actually going to be split in half. The reason it's split in half, in much the same way that the panels are connected in series and parallel, so are these batteries. Two of these batteries are connected in series. So I basically have two sets of two. So two of these batteries are connected positive to negative. And then, so think of this as one big battery now, once I've made that connection, and this is one big battery once I've made that connection. Then I take these two batteries and I bring them, almost like a combiner box, I bring them to this little fuse dealy.
Yeah.
And that serves the same purpose basically as that combiner box. Now I've turned my two batteries into one battery coming out of here.
Okay.
So it kind of works like that. So the reason I tell you all that is because when I test these, I'm only going to see half to each of these. And I'm not even going to see exactly half. I'm going to see a little less. And the reason I'm going to see a little less is because, one, there's some conversion loss and things. And two, I'm using a little bit of that energy in the trailer. And like I said, if I were to turn the air conditioner on, you would see way less energy actually going to these batteries than what's being reported right here, because a bunch of it would be being used in the trailer. But as long as I'm not using more in the trailer than I'm getting from the panels, whatever's left over will be going to these batteries. So I can even... Depending on how the sun is and whatever's happening, I can... Okay, there's nothing in front of that door that'll get knocked over because that door's going to move a bunch. Even with... If I were to turn the air conditioner on right now, as long as the air conditioner doesn't use more than 967 watts or whatever this thing is bringing in, the batteries will still get a little bit. So the batteries can still go up.
Yeah.
They'll just go up slower. Okay? So, here we are. We're getting almost 20 amps now. So it's going up as we sit here. We're at 950 watts, so the sun is getting higher. So if a cloud were to go by, you'd see it. Boom, it would drop. So it's beautiful because it's all real and it all makes sense if you understand what you're looking at. So I am changing this meter to amps. I'm setting it to amps.
Right.
And I want it to be, this is AC, I want it to be DC amps. So I'm actually going to change it to DC. Because this is all DC at this point. Not until we leave the inverter is it AC. So I'm going to, I don't know why that's reading something right now, but I'm going to clamp this around the wires for the batteries and see how our 19.8, almost 20 amps is being delivered to the batteries. So for example, here's one set of batteries. 8 and change.
Okay.
And I'm going to guess the other one's also getting probably 8 and change. So the other red wire is this one. 8 and change. So like I said, of the 20 amps that we're getting, you can only see about 16 and change here, and that's partially because some of the energy is being used in the trailer, and probably just because there's a little bit of loss along the way. So the first time I did that, it was super cool. That to me is cool. I can see and feel and understand that. I can see how the energy is traveling. So these two battery banks, in a sense, if you think of them as two battery banks, are getting half of what this thing is producing.
Yeah.
So if I were to kick the air conditioner on, even though these numbers would still be the same, what I would see over here would be little, if anything, because I might be using it all in the trailer. And they might even go backwards. They might start, if I use more than the air conditioner, than is being provided by the panels, the batteries, the batteries will actually start to drain.
Yeah.
So, okay, does that all make sense?
Yes.
So we have followed the energy from the panels, getting combined, coming into the combiner box, and the combiner box now sending it on to the batteries.
Yeah.
Now it does that through this E-panel. So these wires actually travel through this E-panel. They hit breakers so that we've got protection in case anything runs away, in case two wires touch, in case insulation gets stripped, in case a mouse eats something, whatever. Right? A breaker will trip and all that. But so that's what this E-panel does. But as a concept, it's charge controller feeding batteries. Okay?
Yeah.
So we've got that far. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the batteries get fed by the charge controller. They output their energy into this box. This is the inverter.
Okay.
So, up to this point, we've been DC power, direct current.
Yeah.
What we want in a trailer or a house or whatever in general is AC, right? We want it in outlets and whatever. 120 volts, alternating current. Don't fall off. That's what this guy does.
Okay.
And again, he does it cleanly, right? There are different versions and levels and technologies of inverter. This one is it doesn't say it on it, but I think it's like a pure sine wave. There's probably some stuff on the side that says some things. Again, this one I believe, in my opinion, is the highest level of technology that we have. Power that comes out of panels and batteries, even batteries, it's dirty, right? It's not pretty. If you look at it in waveform, if you look at waveforms on an oscilloscope, if you get all super technical, it's not pretty. And our electronic devices, like computers and things, they want clean, consistent, nice power, right? Mm-hmm. That's what this guy's job is. Not only it has to convert it to DC, from DC to AC, it also wants to make it clean. It wants to provide it nicely in a nice waveform pattern. It doesn't want to be glitchy. That waveform shouldn't be kind of square. It should be nice. It should be a nice sine wave, nice and smooth. Other versions of inverters might not provide such clean power. Now, depending on the device you're using it for, it may or may not matter. But if you want to run a laptop or whatever, you might actually ruin that thing if you don't provide it nice, clean, pretty consistent power.
Right.
So that's what this guy's job is, to convert it and to make it pretty and clean. So this one is a pure sine wave inverter. Okay. It's actually an inverter charger. We'll talk about what that means in a second. So this is where the electricity that's coming from the batteries now gets changed to AC so that we can use it at a wall socket, wherever.
Yeah.
So it comes out of here and it travels, and it actually travels, in my case, it travels out of, wires come out of this thing and they travel through some of this conduit and they end up over here.
Okay.
And again, they go through this E-panel. There's breakers involved for protection and things.
So it comes out of here into there and then back into there?
It actually goes, if you think about the wire traveling, it goes, the wires hit the combiner box outside.
Yeah.
They come into the charge controller here.
Yeah.
From the charge controller, they really want to make their way to the batteries.
Yeah.
But they go through here to do it. So they go here, batteries.
Yes.
Then out of the batteries, it comes out of the batteries into the inverter, but it does that through the E-panel. So it goes here, here. Like I said, this is a landing point. So it goes in, over to the inverter, and then after the inverter, it comes out of the inverter, hits here, and goes out to the plug.
Where's it coming out of here into
It actually comes out of this side right here. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great.
And there's only 4 wires maybe if you count the ground.
Yeah.
And you can go back and watch a bunch of videos on electricity in general, like Electricity 101 and AC versus DC and all this stuff. DC, direct current, electrons flow in one direction to create a circuit, right?
Yeah.
Because of that, you always have a positive and a negative wire. When you talk DC, your wires are positive, negative, and ground. Positive, negative, positive, negative. When you get to the AC world, AC is alternating current. The electrons are no longer flowing in one direction to make a circuit. The electrons are going back and forth, alternating. They alternate direction.
Right.
So you'll see this in videos if you watch Electricity 101 type stuff, right? So now the electrons are doing this. They're not flowing. Because of that, there's no longer the concept really of positive and negative wires when you get to AC. When you get to AC, they're hot and neutral. A current carrying wire and a return path for the electricity. So that's another thing to understand. When people talk about positive negative wires, hot neutral wires, that's the difference between DC and AC, direct current and alternating current. So when you get to alternating current world, what comes out of this box is actually 2 hot wires and a neutral wire. That's the 3 wires that come out of this thing. The reason it's 2 hot wires is because this is actually capable of producing 240 volt capacity. Like if you wanted to run an electric range, it might need 240. If you want to run some kind of big pump or motor, it might need 240. The things in our houses, even our fridges and even our washer and dryer and stuff, they still only need 120 volt electricity. So they only need 1 hot wire. But this thing will provide 240, so it has 2 hot wires that come out of here.
If I wanted to take,
And I start to lose it at that point, actually, to tell you the truth.
If I wanted to go DC,
Yeah.
but how do I tap into a DC from here?
Well,
So I've got to.
if you wanted your whole system to be DC...
No.
Oh, okay, okay.
Just wanted to tap.
So if
into
you
it.
wanted... Okay. So here... I'm guessing at this point. I'm guessing at this point. But what I think would happen, let's say you wanted to run one device.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a pump, maybe it's a fridge, a DC fridge, off of this system. I think what would happen is when you sent so as we follow the flow of things, when the electricity gets to the batteries, when it leaves the batteries, what I would think is, remember I said it lands in here first. So it leaves the batteries, it lands here, and it goes to the inverter. What I would think is you'd leave the batteries, you would land here, you would provide a breaker for protection, and you would leave that breaker, and instead of going into the inverter, you would go right to your device at that point.
From here.
From here.
So
Now there'd be a breaker there for protection, but that would be DC, and you could run that wire out of that breaker to your pump or your fridge or whatever it might be, and that's DC. It now hasn't been converted.
now, would you plug a device in? I mean, is there a socket?
Well, you would run the wires.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I understand.
But let's say that I wanted to. No.
Now, generally, a DC, with DC, you're not going to have a wall socket
That's
like
what
you're
I'm
used to.
talking about.
You're not going to have this.
I think I've
You're
seen.
not going to have this.
I think I've seen a DC wall socket.
It's possible, but generally what a DC wall socket looks like is
like a
your
little
car
hole.
lighter.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
like
a DC.
that.
So what you would really be doing is, when electricity leaves the inverter, say, and I say it's AC,
Yeah.
how do I really use it? Well, I run wires to a box, and inside that box, I make connections, and it provides a place for me to plug in. So, for example, the wires that come out of this thing land in here, they break off at one point, and they feed through this little conduit. They feed into this box. This is just a wall outlet.
Yeah.
So, a couple of wires feed through here. They're very small, actually, because this doesn't have a lot of capacity. They're actually these tiny little thin wires. See this one?
Yeah.
This white one?
Yeah.
And this green one? And there should be a black one. You see this thin black one?
Yeah.
Those thin wires are going through this conduit to this.
Right.
So, that's how I take the power from the inverter and provide it to a wall outlet.
Yeah. So isn't there
But
a
if I-
DC version of this?
Yes, yes. So, what you would be doing, where I said if the power ran from the batteries, stopped here, and went straight out to some DC device,
Yeah.
it would really go into a similar, I don't know what it looks like, but essentially you'd be wiring it to a cigarette lighter connection. Yeah. And then that's your plug point for whatever device you're plugging in, a pump, or whatever.
Right.
I'm probably super oversimplifying that, and I may even be saying it wrong, but in theory, in concept, that's what you're doing.
What's this thing?
That is the comm box. That's for communication and monitoring and things. I mentioned the comm box inside.
yes, yeah.
Not necessary for the system to really function, but it is necessary to for things to talk to each other and to report any information that you'd want to see. That is a router so that I can get it inside on the computer.
Right.
I can actually pull up on the computer, I can pull up graphs that will show me on any given day what my system did. In terms of what came in, what went out, all this stuff. That box it's really just a waterproof box, a weatherproof box. Inside of that is, you can see that the wires that go into it come from these batteries. Mm-hmm. There is a little chip in there that is a battery monitoring system. So Liam put that in there, and he put that in there so that he could monitor these batteries remotely as through a Wi-Fi connection. He wanted to be able to monitor temperature and individual. So these batteries, I don't know if you even noticed, if you look at these batteries close, can you see? It's almost like, you see each of these little holes
It's crazy,
or dots?
isn't it? Yeah, they're like
Think
little
of that
batteries.
as a bunch of AA.
It's crazy.
Now they're not AA, but
I
they're
know.
about that size.
It's the same.
That's
form
a
factor.
ton of batteries.
Same form factor.
All put in a little package.
Yeah.
That's all it is. So those would be called cells.
Right.
This battery is made up of a bunch of these cells. I forget the number, but it's a lot of these cells, right? That battery monitoring system that's in there takes data through these wires and will report to you the basically data about every individual cell.
Wow.
So you could tell if one cell started to go bad, started to run off and do goofy things or whatever. That's what a it's hard to say that, battery monitoring system is for. So you can monitor
so you want
the
what cell it
individual.
is.
Yes. You
And then
could
you can
pinpoint
replace-
one bad
and you can
cell.
replace it.
Sure. You could maybe cut it out of the loop somehow. But that's all this is. This is almost like a crap ton of AA batteries
Yeah.
just linked together in a box. That's right. The first time that hit me, I was like, wow, that's crazy, right? So
And what's this little thing? That's part of the monitoring system.
it is. So that is actually called, I believe it's called a Raspberry Pi.
Oh,
It's-
Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, it's really just a device to collect a bunch of data and,
Yeah.
and that you can spit it out in a form
Okay.
that you can use. This was all stuff. This was specifically for Liam to be able to kind of monitor a bunch of things. He had software that he had written himself that he takes a bunch of the data from this system and he can plot it and graph it and do a bunch of things. You can do all kinds of things with the data. So assuming you want to make your energy AC now, you send it goes through here into the inverter. The inverter converts it into, I don't know why they call it an inverter, by the way, as opposed to a converter, but it converts from DC to AC. And then you take it out in wires, and these wires, now they go to breakers first, they might go to a bus bar, but eventually they leave this box. These ones leave right here.
Yeah.
And it's 4 wires in this case, 2 hots, a neutral, and a ground. There should be a green one going in there. There is a green one going in there. They travel through here, they go over here, and you've got the same 3 wires, 3 black wires, and 1 green wire. So 2 hots, a neutral, and a ground. So I'm actually sending 240 volts because I have 2 hots. Okay.
Going out of
So the coming out of the inverter,
Yeah.
we hit some breakers for protection, and then we leave this E panel, this distribution panel, and we go over here. What's on the other side of this box? Can you guess what's on the other side of this box?
A big cable going to the RV.
It's a plug for the RV. It's the receptacle.
right, yeah.
It's the receptacle for the
That's the
RV.
receptacle,
So
yeah.
yes, I am plugged in on the other side of this. So that's where I physically plug my deal in. So if you had your RV might be 50 amp.
It
Your
is.
plug that's on your
is.
cord that's on your RV. Mine is 30.
Right.
This on the other side of this box is a 50 amp plug-in.
Okay.
And sometimes a 50 amp, depending on what's in it and everything, it might require 240 volts to do certain things. Maybe there's a dryer in there, or maybe there's some kind of electric range or something. I don't know. And I hope I could be wrong about some of this stuff, but because a lot of this stuff now starts to throw me. Here's where I get a little confused. The difference between 120 and 240, 1 hot versus 2 hots, and all this stuff. But there is a 50 amp plug on the other side of this thing. You could plug your RV directly into it. Mm-hmm. I use an adapter because mine is 30 amp.
Yeah.
So I use an adapter and I plug my 30 amp thing into that adapter. I believe, even though there's 2 hot wires here, I think I only need 1 to run my trailer. So this is a little bit, I think, overkill, but it doesn't hurt anything. Here we can go out and look at that plug, but I think we've talked through almost everything. Let's step outside. Don't trip. Let's go outside and maybe we'll get in the shade, or maybe we can even go in the trailer and you can ask me any questions you want. Did you follow all of that?
Pretty much.
Did I touch on everything? I think I did. I tried to.